I started at WIU in 2009, I want to say, or 2007, and I finished all together in 2010. So it's been 12 years.
Yeah, it was a crazy time. For some that might remember, and you probably remember better than others, you came to work with me, and of course I was just getting done with some cancer treatments. I had dealt with a lymphoma, and I think I was bald when you met me. Was that right? Or nearly bald?
You were bald. You were. You had just, I think you just finished when I got there. So yeah.
Yeah, I'd gone through chemo. It was really a rough time. If anybody has their mics on, please, like Grace, please go ahead and mute just in case so we can avoid feedback. All right, got her. Okay, so it was a crazy time, and then it got even better though, because did I get the NSF grant right before you showed up or after you showed up with Sue?
Right after.
Yeah, so it was a really unique time where we kind of went through this really difficult personal struggle, family struggle. Sue and I were dealing with my cancer. And then it was almost like I guess, kind of like the Lance Armstrong moment without the doping. And we ended up getting from a science perspective, we ended up getting this NSF grant. And we lived pretty high in the hog. I remember we were going to a lot of pretty amazing meetings, and we had some pretty great people in the lab at that time. Anyway, Bridgette, I'm going to hand over the host control to you, and it'll probably work better for you for speaking. Does that sound good?
Okay, that sounds good to me. Thank you for having me, and thank you everyone for your patience today.
Yeah, thank you. It's exciting to have you visiting with us. Let me make you host, and then please, then you can share your screen.
Absolutely. It's not giving me the option to share. Would I have to pause the recording?
As host, you should be able to share by going down to the bottom. Do you see a share screen?
No, it's not. It just gives me video, mute, security, participants, chat, and pause or stop recording. Which is odd because normally I can share my screen, so that's weird. I guess what I can do is, in the meantime, just kind of talk through my PowerPoint, and I can send it to you. There's no intellectual property or proprietary information on it, and you can disseminate it to everyone who attends. I hate that I can't share it, so that's so weird.
Well, if you send an email to me real quick, I could share it probably, but.
Okay, and I've taken up enough of everyone's time, I'm quite certain.
Okay.
Let's see, while I'm talking, I'll go ahead and try to share it real quick.
Okay.
So to give a little bit of background about me, everyone, my career journey essentially started as an undergrad, and I have a bachelor's degree from Michigan State in pre-med human biology. And I started off as pre-med because at one point I didn't really know if I wanted to go to med school or if I wanted to do research. And so I did a 4-year degree and got a bachelor's and decided to forego studying for the MCAT. And I wanted to learn more about research, so I decided to do a master's degree. And I landed at WIU and had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Musser and his family. And when I started at WIU, I really didn't know what I wanted to do exactly, but I knew that I wanted to help patients. And so I started working with Dr. Musser, and at that time, I didn't know anything about translational studies or translational research. And so I had been speaking with Dr. Musser, and this is right before he had got his grant funding. And I'm originally from Michigan, so I was out-of-state tuition. And he was telling me that there was going to be an opportunity for an assistantship, and it would involve teaching graduate students about RNA extraction and DNA And it sounds really interesting to me, and it allowed me to really learn more about the molecular components of cell signaling and really how to learn some fundamental molecular skills that could be applicable not only in translational science, so when working with animal models or plant models or insect models, but it could also be translated from bench to bedside. And so that for me was extremely fascinating. And so we started. Hello?
You're still here. Please turn off your iPhone, whoever.
Sorry, I have an echo from somewhere, but we started isolating RNA, and I started learning about microarray technologies and also learning how it could be implemented in regular just translational and clinical medicine. And so we worked on, got to do a few publications with Dr. Musser, and I got to travel to some conferences and kind of see also what was going on out in the research space and just learn more about presenting science and being able to articulate research better. And so right before I defended my master's with Western, I had started looking for opportunities to continue doing molecular research outside of Illinois. And so I ended up applying for a position at Emory University as a research specialist. And there I actually used the exact same skills I learned with Dr. Musser in his lab on prostate cancer. And so I started working in prostate cancer, doing microarrays, isolating specific genes that in the Atlanta population, we have a very rich, diverse population. So these were in African American and Hispanic men who had different markers that were associated with certain types of more aggressive prostate cancer. And so I used this RNA extraction from learning with tomato plants and caterpillars and was able to really apply it to oncology. And for me, it just kind of clicked from there. And one thing about academia is you have to get grants and you have to publish and you have to know your research. And it's a very competitive field. And
all
so
the lab, pretty much. And they're all research students, or like a medical student, but like a student.
You know that you want to go into like medicine, but you're not sure
when. Please shut down your speaker.
Hello. Hello.
We're still here.
And so the lab that I was working with actually lost funding, and they could no longer support us. So I ended up transferring those skills to a cardiothoracic lab where I was able to take my research into mice. And so I started working on DB leptin receptor knockout mice models, and I looked at ischemia reperfusion or heart attacks in certain mouse models and was able to then take that thoracic, extract the thoracic passageways from the mice, cryo-freeze them, grind them up, and look at the genes that were regulated in response to gasotransmitters, which is like nitric oxide and things like that. And so after about 1.5 years of doing that, I decided to pursue a PhD. And luckily, Dr. Musser loved me enough to write a letter of recommendation. And I was accepted into the molecular pharmacology program at Emory, where I decided to pursue oncology, so molecular oncology. And how the PhD works is you actually rotate through 4 different therapeutic areas, and you decide which PI or principal investigator you want to do your dissertation studies with. So it's almost like a short-term marriage for about 5 years of your life working on your PhD. And so with my PhD, I decided to do breast cancer. And so I focused on trastuzumab resistance and HER2 positive breast cancer. There's 5 different types of breast cancer that we know of. And HER2 is an epidermal growth factor receptor that is actually overexpressed on certain cells in women who have breast cancers. And so trastuzumab is a monoclonal antibody that actually targets those cells and was the claim to fame for that specific breast cancer group for a long time until they developed resistance. And so when you learn about different treatment regimens in oncology, you learn that there's a first line, there's a second line, there's a third line treatment as it starts to recur over time. And so trastuzumab is typically first line given, and as resistance occurs, there has to be another line of treatment that comes. And so by studying resistance, a lot of pharmaceutical companies want to know what the next drug is that can target resistance. And so I identified a growth factor, it was called GDF15, that's upregulated in response to trastuzumab treatment. So the body is really, really smart. It can compensate in different areas when it's treated or inhibited. And so instead of responding to trastuzumab, it actually upregulated a growth factor that's released from the stroma of cells to almost resist the treatment. And so we started targeting that treatment through creating a nanoparticle where we could attach a neutralizing DNA enzyme to deliver into the cell to treat those cells that were resistant to trastuzumab. And I worked this out on mouse models, xenografts you would call them, where you can inject cells into both flank regions of the mouse and put treatment on one side of the tumor and have your control on the other side of the tumor, and you actually can measure with a caliber the tumor or the response rate of your therapeutic. And so that's what my research was in for my dissertation studies. And during that time, I realized that I didn't want to be at the bench. So I realized also that there's a business behind science, and I wanted to be able to learn more about that. So I pursued an internship in, at the Office of Intellectual Property at Emory University, where I learned about marketing, commercialization, and also about how the process works from bench to bedside. So when you're going from phase 1 scientific studies all the way up until commercialization, patentability, marketing, and all of that out of the gate, which takes a long process and is a very expensive a process that happens. And you'll be able to see it on the slide deck that I'll send to you. So in going and doing the internship at the Office of Tech Transfer, I was able to really kind of determine that I didn't want to be in the lab. I didn't want to pursue a career in academics, but I wanted to stay abreast on the research. I wanted to still be a lifelong learner. I wanted, one of the first things that was told to me when I went into research was that we are the thought creators. We are the people who release the data, publish the data, really get into the granularity of how things work, and we then translate it back in lay terms to the general public. And that's always been fascinating to me. I've always been curious about how things work and how I can explain it to others. And so when I realized that I wanted to still kind of be outside of the lab, I started looking at opportunities in medical affairs. And medical affairs can be broken down into a multitude of components, but essentially, medical affairs are the scientists that work in industry. And there's a lot of different parts of industry. You could have medical devices. You could have diagnostic kits. So you all probably use diagnostic kits for your RNA, where you put your RNA in the tube in it. So that's also people in medical affairs make those. They go through a regulatory process. They go through a Q&A process. They're tested. And the most recent thing that everybody probably can relate to is the rapid test for COVID. Those are diagnostic tests that we scientists develop. And so you can also have medical devices, such as devices that deliver shock therapy to tumors, like electroporation, or you could have medical devices that cryoablate or ablate tumors. There's also medical devices that OBGYNs use. So there's tons of devices that are also utilized in the field as well. And then lastly, there's pharmaceuticals. So you think of immunotherapy, diabetes medicines such as metformin. When you think of like Zoloft, all of those are therapeutics and pharmaceuticals that are under medical affairs as well as commercial, which are two separate things. But the medical affairs component is where I work at. And in particular, I work in oncology. And I work at Merck as a regional medical scientific director, where I work with their women's gyne, so the gynecology, as well as the breast malignancies team. And as a regional medical scientific director, I cover 4 states. So I cover Georgia, Alabama, Arkansas, and Mississippi. And essentially what we do is we help teach physicians how therapeutics work. So the molecular signaling, the adverse events, all the way down to the new data that comes out from new publications, new competitive intelligence. All of that is my responsibility, not only for my region, but nationally. And some other hats that I wear at Merck are I'm the DEI national ambassador. So I make sure that our therapeutics are also relevant in patient populations that might be socioeconomically oppressed or underserved. And I also make sure that our executive leadership team is aware of the disparities that occur, particularly in my region, which is comprised of the Delta, which is a super underserved area that is rural and doesn't have a lot of access to medical support. In particular, a lot of women under the age of 30 have extremely advanced stage cervical cancer. And so it's a major issue that is being shed light on now, but it's something that I'm super passionate about, just getting care to the patients and taking treatment to the patients who need it. And so that's a little bit about what I do and how translational science has really catapulted my career. For me, next steps, my dreams are of going into global medical affairs and really working more on diversity and inclusion when it comes to providing therapies to those populations that are underserved. But I also still really like to get into the granular details of science. So I travel now too. I actually just got back from San Antonio Breast Cancer Symposium, where some of the most cutting edge data was just this weekend recently, which was on ADCs. And ADCs are antibody drug conjugates. So we traditionally had drugs that could only deliver whatever payload was in that drug to the patient. But now there's a way to have different linkers and cleavages that can be administered to patients that give like a macro dose amount of therapy to patients. And they're starting to show a lot of clinical benefit in the world because these patients are able to get precision therapy without the previous toxicities that occurred in first generation therapeutics. And so I'll leave it to questions. I'm so sorry about the slide deck, but I'll make sure you all get it. And you can also get my contact information if you have any follow-up questions or need me to connect you with anyone.
Sounds good. Okay, so can you hear me okay, Bridgette?
Yeah, I can hear you just fine.
Okay, so we have people here and we have people online. And so if you want to ask a question, I will just speak up loudly and I'll try to make sure, or you can come down here. It might be fun for Bridgette to see you. Does that sound good? Or please raise your hand on Zoom if you have a question. So who would like to start? Again, this would be about maybe how you, about your journey or some therapeutic thing that you may have learned, or maybe what it's like to be in industry. I guess I'd ask a question because I've always wondered a little bit about academia versus industry. What's the work-life balance like? And you don't have tenure. How scary can it be with realignments with different companies and you know, it sounds like there's pretty good profits, but it can also be a good chance that you might not have a job in some regards, depending on the market. I don't know. Maybe this is all speculation, but maybe could you address some of these kind of things?
Absolutely. So I think job security is important for everyone, both academic and industry. When I made the choice to go into industry, I think one of the things that I was afraid of is I didn't know how vast it was. You have small businesses, which are startups. So the work-life balance really doesn't exist there. You're working all the time because you might not have a drug that's even approved or has a breakaway designation or anything. So you're trying to chase the gamut to get approval. So that's a little unpredictable. That is something that I would pursue if I were young and didn't have any kids and wanted the experience and wanted to travel. For me, I looked at companies when I first came out of my postdoc, which was at the VA Medical Center. I wanted a smaller company because I wanted medical devices because medical devices doesn't necessarily have as many firewalls as pharma does. So when I worked in medical devices, I was able to get the exposure to healthcare economics and the FDA and learn a lot, and then kind of package those soft skills as well as the skills that I learned in medical affairs and apply to more of a more stable company, so to speak. There's always, so for me, you know, I watch the stocks. I make sure that I'm aware of what's going on in the industry. Just recently, there was a pharmaceutical company that went bankrupt this week. And, you know, some of their patients may not even have access to their therapeutic anymore, even though they're on their clinical trials. So that's a major problem for them, but also for the people who work for them, thinking about layoffs and things of that nature. But I think one thing that I've learned about the industry is your skills are very translatable to wherever you can go. And there's always, not that you want to be constantly job hopping, which is something millennials tend to do now for some reason, but there are a lot of jobs out there. And in the industry sector, like I said, there's medical devices, there's diagnostics, and then there's pharma. So for me, it's been rather stable, but I am cognizant of how volatile the industry can be. But just like with academia too, you know, if you're not getting the grants or you're not getting the funding, it could be quite stressful as well. So you're rolling the dice either way.
I have a question for you, Bridgette. Come on down. A student's going to come down here. It's easier than trying to move the camera around. No, come on over here. Then she can see you.
Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Hi.
Okay. A little bit.
Okay, so I was just wondering if you can still remember some of the courses you took when you were in Western, like some of the elective courses that you took that will help, you know, students get into, you know, medical program. And also, my second question is, considering the fact that, you know, getting PhD in medical field is quite competitive, do you have any kind of publication at the time you know, get into PhD program? Thank you.
Yeah. So the first question was the course load that I took while I was at Western. I actually think I just took the regular biology course load. I think the thing that helped distinguish me was having the assistantship, the teaching experience, and also, you know, I think we attended the entomology conference. So being able to network, and we had a few posters that we presented there. So where was that at? In Nevada, Reno. And so we were able to go and demonstrate our work. So just getting the experience, having the full experience is so important overall, because you could have all of the research and the data, but if you can't articulate the science, in industry, they need you to have those soft skills to be able to articulate what you're saying in layman terms. And so I think it's important to just be well-rounded in that aspect. Even if, so teaching is important. If you can get a teaching assistantship or be able to demonstrate those skills to in some way, tutoring or whatever, I think that would be helpful to put on your application as well as your CV. And then the next question was,
well, I think you presented your results, but you had a lot of results that are publishable if you just have an advisor that can help finish that up. So you still have publishable data for
yeah, so we had some posters that were accepted to some congresses, and then, I'm sorry, congresses are also called conferences, so they're interchangeable. And we also published eventually, I want to say, and then when I was working as a research specialist at Emory, I was publishing also a lot. So I probably got 3 publications in like 18 months. And one way to do that is just, you know, find a PI that is willing to allow you to write. A lot of PIs don't have time to write. So if you can help with the writing and also help packaging the data, you're guaranteed to get on a publication. And then for a PhD, it's required that you publish. So for my PhD, I had to have 2 publications and a 1 review article.
I think one thing, just remembering when you were applying and getting some feedback from Emory, I think some things that really stood out is that you, and obviously the teaching experience was really helpful, but proof that you really had worked in the lab, I think was good. You had a thesis, a strong thesis. So even if it wasn't necessarily published when she went to Emory, she had demonstrated through research conferences and posters with titles demonstrating that she'd had real RNA, qPCR kind of experience. And you might have did microarrays too, right? At the time.
Yeah, I did microarrays.
And so those were, and she had real concrete ways of saying she worked on this versus maybe just some exposure in a lab class or something like that. And then, and developing a really, you know, she got a really strong letter, one of the strongest letters I could possibly write. And so if you can really garner that strong letter from your advisor, because they've, you know, she was really critical to getting a lot of work done in my lab that is still very valuable, and hopefully will be published again someday. I have lots of that kind of backlog, but so I think those were things that really helped. I remember they were saying that they really liked your letter, or somebody said something like that at Emory. And then we actually got to, me and Dr. Engel actually visited Bridgette and Emory. We had a chance to go down there for another reason and go see how she was busy doing her research and so forth. So it was really cool. Yeah. But yeah, so that, I think the main thing is just get into something where you can concretely demonstrate, I can do qPCR, or if you want to be in the environmental field, I can do GPS or GIS. I think, and if you and I really do believe in going to a conference as a capstone to your graduate career.
And to piggyback off that, actually be able to speak to it, because I remember during my interview process, they ask questions, so why is this important? Where could this be translated to? So not only just being, a robot doing the research, but understanding the impact and the value that it has and how it can translate into real world evidence.
Yeah, I've seen some students that might have a long list of all the things that they claim they can do, but as soon as they go in front of a search committee and they start asking a few questions, it becomes pretty clear they didn't have that experience. So it's that probably. Yeah. And she could really say, yeah, this is what I did to purify the RNA. This is what I really did to analyze it. And she had to think about her research. It wasn't like she just, like you said, was a machine. She was a full board expert of the field by the time she was done with it. So another question. Do you ever regret the MD, PhD? Because we used to have those discussions. I always told you that a PhD wasn't it shouldn't be thought of as the fallback degree, that it really is its own thing, that's its own beast, so to speak. Do you have any thoughts about that?
I think I don't regret it at all. I love having a PhD. I honestly can't see myself interacting with patients every day, for one. For two, I interact with MDs and DOs daily. And so they look to me to tell them about, the signaling mechanisms and everything that's going on in the cell, because they don't really have time to dissect all of that. And they also don't have time to understand how it affects different populations. And so for me, that's my passion, and I enjoy it. I don't regret it for a day. Mm-mm.
Does somebody online like to ask a question? I know Dr. Meager usually has something really insightful. Did I catch him? Go ahead and hit the unmute. I can't hear you.
I'm not saying anything. I'm laughing. So I really enjoyed Dr. Moody's or Dr. Peak's talk. I'm not sure which name it is. So it's really impressive, I think, what you've been able to do after going from here.
Mm-hmm.
Let me introduce you to Dr. Cooper. She's our department chair. She's watching. Okay. And then we also have Amy Crosby, who's from the College of Arts and Sciences. She's here too. And she does all sorts of things from outreach and fundraising, all sorts of things for inclusion in our programs as well. I don't know if she's still on, but she definitely jumped on for a little bit. And we have some variety of grad students too. Would somebody like to ask a question from home that's online right now? Don't be shy. Okay. What would you say was the most challenging part of your career? This is coming from Sage. Did you see that?
Yes. Hi, Sage. Thanks for your question. It's dynamic. I think at every stage there's a challenge. So with my master's degree, the challenge was really understanding the science, just fundamentally breaking it down. I think your bachelor's degree, you're really feeding yourself from a water hose, but you have to break it down into this nanoscience and really become an expert in your field. And that was the challenge then. The challenge for my PhD was defending. And so, but before that, you have to qualify. So that's 2 days, 8 hours a day, no open book. For me, it was pharmacology. So you're just getting asked questions nonstop and you have to be ready to spit fire. And so it was a very challenging period of my life, but it reminded me how resilient I was. And I actually was a lot smarter than I thought I was, because, you go blank right before it happens and then the questions start coming and you know everything. For me, the challenge now is work-life balance as I'm a mother. And so I want to, make sure my kids have what they want, but I also am career-driven and I like what I do. And then speaking with Dr. Musser just about what's next, there's tenure track positions in academia, but for me, it's, you go from director of medical affairs, you can lead a team, you can go into clinical trials or global clinical trials. So I'm always trying to learn skills, and I'm always trying to make sure that I am aware and present and able to continue to learn. And so just you learn a lot about yourself as you start to grow and your career starts to progress. So it's constantly a challenge to grow and learn and welcome it, because that's a good thing. So I hope that answered your question to the best of my ability. Perusing through the chat, but I think it was everyone telling me about my mic.
Oh yeah, that's what I've seen too. Does anybody else have a question? Yes, come on down. And kind of squat down so the camera's on you.
How did you decide, like what went into your decision on where to go for your master's?
Let's see. I had actually never heard of Western Illinois before. So when I finished my master's degree, I actually linked up with an organization that's called CHAMPS, and it's based out of Chicago, Illinois Institute of Technology. And they do a post-baccalaureate program. And then they actually had a list of preferred master's degree programs for the students who did the post-baccalaureate, and Western was on there. And I'm from Lansing, Michigan, so it wasn't too far from home for me to drive. And so I drove down, I don't know if you remember this, Dr. Musser, and I stayed in the welcome housing or whatever they have there. And I toured the campus and I liked it. It was small, it was plain, it was intimate. And I saw an opportunity to really focus on my schoolwork there. And so I decided to come and visit.
I thought you also had a connection with Dr. Yaw. It would be a Wuzu is how I would remember. Of course, her name's changed now. Were you a friend of hers? I remember, so she was the person that was a dentist that talked to you all. And so she was friends with Dr. Yaw. Was there a connection there too?
Yeah, we were both a part of the CHAMPS program. Yeah, from Illinois Institute of Technology. We both did post-baccalaureate studies there.
Oh, cool. Do you still keep up with her much, or has it been a while?
I have not. Her and Warda and a few other people. I see they're doing great, but I haven't. You need to have like a alumni reunion or something. We'll come back.
Yeah, some of you might remember Warda got a Ph.D. also from Florida State. Anybody else have a question? What is the most satisfying aspect of being in industry and your position?
Helping patients. Yeah, I really enjoy helping patients. You'd be surprised how many rural patients don't have access to get treatment. And a lot of clinical trials are only held at large institutions, which is changing now thanks to some of the new implementations by the NCI and the NIH. But you'd be surprised how many patients just have barriers to access, social determinants of health. And so being able to get the treatment to the patients is rewarding. I also enjoy traveling. So I don't travel as much as I used to, but to get around the country and see all the data that's happening and all of the people we're helping, starting to see a lot more survivors come to our congresses, which is really nice, and hear patient testimonies. So definitely the patients. It's great to hear that their lives are being extended. And when it comes to PARP inhibitors or olaparib, extended for up to 7 years after cancer. So that's huge in the ovarian cancer space. So patients.
Does anybody at home have a question before we start to get close to wrapping up? I would feel free to ask a question if anybody has one. Don't be shy. Anybody in the audience? What would be your parting wisdom? I mean, you kind of transitioned from undergraduate, you went through this. Oh, do we have one more? Here's one more question. Would you say that the connections you made along the way helped you get to what's it like working through COVID in your field? So was that two different questions from two people? Let's see.
Yeah, it was. I'll answer the first one. Networking is essential. Making connections, learning. Also, you know, if you're interested in a certain career or you see someone on LinkedIn and you're like, oh my gosh, how'd they get there? Send them a quick message. Ask them if you can have a virtual meeting, 15-minute virtual coffee. Just do an informational interview. I did a lot of those before I decided to go in the industry. I found those very helpful, and a lot of people do them with me. Also, just, you know, going to events, you know, being able to go to conferences, submitting abstracts, you know, carrying your poster and taking it and putting it up and being able to articulate the science in front of random strangers is awesome. You also can network there. So I definitely think your network is essential. Yes. And to the next question, how was it working during COVID? You know, travel slowed down for us during COVID, and we're still working in a hybrid world. Everything is virtual, even the conferences that we would normally attend. I used to do one-on-one visits, so I would go from institution to institution and travel around and meet with our key opinion leaders, or KOLs is what we call it. But now I can do group meetings virtually, and I also see a lot of the KOLs at large conferences. So for oncology, ASCO is a huge one. It's in Chicago every year, and San Antonio Breast is a huge one, which is what I just got back from. So it hasn't been, travel hasn't been as much, but it's still been busy.
Anybody else have a question? The only thoughts I had was, could you talk a little bit about what's it mean to transition from student to scientist? And then maybe what is your parting wisdom you'd like to share with our WIU students on how to move forward, I guess, in the career and maybe deal with hurdles and things like that. So I know through a few different things out there, but.
From student to scientist, it's a journey. I think being dedicated to understanding the fundamentals is so important because it's applicable across a lot of therapeutic areas. So understanding how you can use what you're doing right now and take it anywhere, to be honest. You don't have to stay in academia, or you could teach, you could do all types of things. You know, the sky is the limit. And really taking that honestly and knowing that you can really carve out your own niche and create your own career path is amazing. It's incredible. I think sometimes you might have some naysayers, you might have some people who don't believe in you, but always maintain your integrity. I think that is so important, especially when it comes to being true to who you are, your value system, the robustness of your data, your scientific rigor and integrity. And I think, Dr. Musser, you can even attest to this. When our microarray machine didn't work for 5 months, and we realized it was actually working, it was just imbalanced. And so we had so much data that we were trying and it wasn't working, and we didn't know what was going on. And we actually finally figured out that all of those chips that we had made actually had really good data on them. And so staying true to that North Star of having integrity and operating in it and just being resilient is so important. I think the transition into scientist, it's almost like a blossoming flower, but you're constantly growing and you're constantly learning. And the fundamentals that I'm speaking about are going to help you evolve as the field evolves, because if you don't have a solid grasp on that, you won't be able to latch on to new things. And what I mean, for an example, is understanding the transition for me between nanotherapeutics, or using iron oxide nanoparticles and gold nanoparticles, and now using antibody-dependent drug conjugates. So there's always going to be a next generation and a new evolution of something. So you want to make sure you understand those fundamentals now that you're learning, so that when you are in your field, you know, it's a baseline. You already know it. It's nothing you have to really think about. You can just add on to it. But those are that's my little nugget of wisdom. And to always just stay true to you and make sure that you're working in your passion and it makes you happy and you feel like you're fulfilling the purpose that you have doing what you're doing, because if not, you won't be fulfilled no matter how much money you're making.
Yeah, it was really an intensive time in the lab. We had a lot of great students and were working really hard, but it was easy to just blame the students because, the RNA wasn't working because it's so easy to degrade. And then we find out that after lots of scans on this microarray scanner, this $30,000 box in that just a matter of just pushing our thumb and just pushing it over a little bit, got a nice scan of this image that we needed. And obviously Dr. Moody's data is a lot better than I thought it was. So it turned out really well, but it was an intense time. I mean, it was a really busy lab and very intensive amount of things we went on at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, it was a pleasure and an honor to get to work with you, and it's wonderful to see you succeed. And
thank you.
It's
Thank
a
you
real
for
blessing
having me.
to our department, and I'm thankful that you came through our system, our school.
Thank you so much. Best of luck to everyone in your future endeavors. And Dr. Messer, if you need me to pop through again, just let me know. If you need any resources, feel free to reach out.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Take care, Dr. Cooper. I mean, Dr. Moody. I said Dr. Cooper.